Hello, hello, and welcome to Keep It Colorful. My name is Jessie Robertson, and today we are going to paint this seahorse in acrylic paint. We're going to dive into the mesmerizing world of seahorses, where you'll not only learn to paint this beautiful creature, but also explore some fun techniques for creating seaweed textures using some straws and some sea sponges. Now, before we start, here are 3 fun facts about seahorses. Seahorses are unique in the animal kingdom because the males are the ones who get pregnant and give birth. They have a prehensile tail, which is much like a monkey's, and they use to grasp onto seaweed and coral. Seahorses have a slow swimming speed, but despite this, they can move their eyes independently, which allows them to look in 2 different directions at the same time. Now, this class is going to be free for a whole week, so make sure to take advantage of this opportunity. If you enjoy this tutorial, you might consider joining our Kick Academy subscription. With the subscription, you'll have access to this class along with exciting new selections that I add every single month. Now let's go ahead and get our brushes ready and dive into the enchanting world of the seahorse. I wanted to let you know that today's class is live, so feel free to say hello and let me know where you are tuning in from today. Now, this painting is done on a black canvas. Now, you can get a canvas that's black right from the art store, and they pre-gesso it for you with a black gesso. However, I typically find it easiest just to paint my canvas black. In fact, if you have a painting that you might want to paint over, painting a painting using an old canvas and painting it black and using it for a new project is a great way to, say, recycle an old canvas that you weren't really happy with how it turned out. Or if you're starting with a white canvas, we're just going to paint it black together right before we start painting on those corals. For size of canvas today, I'm using a size 12 by 12 inch canvas, but please feel free to paint on other substrates that are suitable, like canvas board, or even a sketchbook that's suitable for painting. So that would be an acrylic paper or a watercolor paper. For brushes for today, we will be using a number 12 flat brush, a number 8 Filbert, a number 6 bright brush, a number 6 round brush, you'll also want some smaller round brushes for doing details like a number 1 and a number 0 round brush. Grab for me a 1/4 inch flat brush. This is going to be one of the most useful brushes for today's tutorial. So if you don't have a 1/4 inch flat brush, it's a rectangle shaped bristle, anything that's close to a 1/4 inch wide, like this one I'm holding up, or like this one. Either of these would be awesome. Perfect for painting in the little cells and divots in the seahorse's body. The rest of the brushes are ones I use to make the texture in the seaweed, including a big long script liner brush, a bristly fan, I also used a little mini acrylic 10-0 fan. And 10-0 is the size. It's so small, it's even smaller than my thumb. We're going to pull some of the texture into our seaweed, and it's going to be great fun. So blowing it on with a straw and sponging. But then we're going to want to tint it all these different colors. And to do that, we'll pull some see-through paint over top, and I just dusted the paint on with a mop brush, which is why I have a mop brush listed, but any nice soft brush will do if you don't happen to have a mop brush yourself. Important for the seaweed textures, grab a straw. I have some cute paper pineapple straws here. You really just need one. And some painting sponges or sea sponges. And if you don't have a painting sponge, you can just ball up some paper towel in your hand and use it in the exact same way. We're going to be sketching our seahorse onto a dark background. So we're going to need a nice light pencil. And today I'm using this white chalk pencil. We're using one medium today, and that medium is glazing liquid. Glazing liquid is what makes our paint really, really see-through, and it's going to allow for beautiful see-through mixes to add over top of our seaweed textures to tint them into different colors. If you don't have glazing liquid, you can use water. The glazing liquid just really ensures you've got a lovely see-through layer, and you can make paint extra thin without worrying about that paint separating. Now, I've added a lot of water to paint in my close to 30 years of painting now. So much that it's almost mostly water with just little bits of paint, and only sometimes do I experience separation, and all that looks like is like the paint isn't one solid sheet of see-through color. It kind of is a little bit spotty and grainy looking. So don't worry about experimenting with lots of water. If you're painting a lot with acrylic, a medium like glazing liquid will help take your painting in really fun and interesting directions, and you can get these really awesome see-through effects. But water, I feel, is the medium that all acrylic painters should experiment with a lot and first. And then you can move on to mediums. But today I'm going to demonstrate how you can use this. For colors for our painting today, we will be using a little squirt of ultramarine blue, some phthalo blue, a little bit of cadmium yellow medium hue, some cadmium orange, a tiny squirt of cadmium red, as well as titanium white and Mars black. A few other supplies that we'll be using today, or really just a few more. I'm going to be using this water bottle, and the spray bottle isn't necessarily a supply for the painting. However, when I pour out my paints on this palette, you'll find your acrylic paints can dry really quickly and even faster if you live in a hot or arid climate. So if you spritz the top of your paints every 15 minutes with some water, it can make sure they stay nice and pliable for the whole 2-hour session. And I do keep most of my paintings to 2 to 2.5 hours long. So sometimes we want to slow the dry time of our paint. However, sometimes we want to speed it up. And when we want to do that, we will use a blow dryer. I use a little mini travel size blow dryer, and I turn it on the hot setting and move it all around to dry my background colors or any color that you want to dry before you can keep on keeping on to the next layer. With acrylic, we need water. It is the medium that we add most to our paints to thin them out and to make them more runny, and we can clean our brushes with water. Whenever you have water, you want to make sure you have something to dry your brushes off on. I'm using paper towel today, but you can recycle old socks and t-shirts or old tea towels for wiping off your brushes as well. Doodly doo. I think that's all. I'm not forgetting anything. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. Now we are going to start by painting our canvas black, and you can put some black on your palette. I'm going to put 3 dollops right on my background, and we'll use a big soft brush to smooth it all out. So you'll want to get nice sized dollops on there if you're going to be squeezing the paint on like me. Take your brush, you can dip it into water. Here I've got my big number 12 flat, and we'll just give this a solid coat. That one blob of black has gone pretty far, but we will need a bit more to get all the way around the edges. I want you to make sure that you cover all the white. Let's give ourselves a nice dark background to work with. And if you know any more Seahorse fun facts, I actually only know a few, so feel free to offer your fun Seahorse facts in the comment section, whether you're watching on my website or on Facebook Live or on YouTube. I need to know. Sharing the planet with all of these creatures, I don't know about you, but sometimes it just is delightful and boggles my mind what our animal friends can do. Like males carrying the babies is really awesome. Because I'm on a canvas, I'm going to start wrapping some of this around the side edges. If you end up loving your painting and wanting to hang it on the wall, or you're going to gift it and you want your recipients to be able to hang it without framing it, painting the edges can be a fun way to treat the edges. Or you can paint them a solid color, or you can leave them raw. You can add little bits of paint to help that water flow, but keep the pigment nice and thick. We want a thick, juicy layer of black as opposed to one that's thin in some areas. So I've definitely got some fingerprints in. I'm going to buff this out, smoothing it nice and soft. I see the Crafty Visage says that seahorses are monogamous. Oh, that's always so sweet. And Deb Dalton says, we have them here in Tampa Bay. They're actually fish. Okay, I did not know that. I didn't know either of those. That's very cool. All right, you guys. So we're just gonna relax today. No stress. Even if something goes awry, we're just gonna work it until we like it. And this painting is very conducive to lots of just experimentation, okay? So once we have our deep black background on, we are going to dry this and we're going to start pulling in our seaweed textures, which I think you're really going to love. So if you have a blow dryer, we're going to give this a blast. If you do not, you're going to let it dry in real time and you're just going to pause the video. Okay. So I'm going to turn this on hot and my sponges will probably blow everywhere, but here we go. If you're watching along and you haven't followed along before, I should let you know I do have a silencing feature for the blow dryer because you were saying your dogs were freaking out with the sound. So I'm going to turn this on hot and I'm going to move it all around until it's really nice and dry. So here we go. All right. Now, sometimes it's hard to tell if your acrylic paint is dry because then if it has a sheen to it. So you want just touch it lightly, make sure it's not sticky or tacky. We want it to be nice and dry. We're really going to push this layer of seaweed around. Let's take a quick peek at our composition before we start launching into pulling on all of these colors and organic shapes. I put my two brushes, slicing it in half vertically into thirds. We really have a graphic like thirds composition going this way. So Seahorse in the central area. And then while they are, not perfectly straight, they wander and sway along. These bits of seaweed really sit on the outside, and the lovely curve that they have to their bodies fits, and the face too in that central third. So as we're pulling up our colors, we'll keep that in mind. That being said, I pulled mine on really loosey-goosey, and then any areas that were around, I wanted the black around the seahorse to really pop it out. So if I had gone a little wild and pulled some of my light color over, we can tweak it by just softening some black over anything. So we'll try to keep this thirds composition in mind, but we can also tweak things should it doesn't have to be perfect in the first layer. It's going to be a process of bringing things in and taking them out if we don't like where they are on the first pass. So here we go. This is feeling nice and dry. So let's squeeze out some of our color. I'm going to take some phthalo blue. I'm going to squeeze out maybe 2 little dollops of my phthalo blue. I'm going to squeeze out a tiny little dollop of some ultramarine blue. We've got some teals in here, which we're going to mix by adding yellow to some phthalo blue. So pour out a little dollop of yellow or 2. I didn't pull these rusty orange colors in until the end of the painting. So let's just start with the bluey greens that we see in here. And my favorite thing about glaze painting is the light can either bounce off the color on top, or it can pass through that layer because it's see-through and pick up more of the white underneath. So as I turn the painting, you might see more of the color or more of the white below. Same thing with the close and far. The light can hit it really differently. So isn't that fun? Like it looks almost black with the light passing through. And as I turn, you might see it pick up more of the blue subtly washed over the black. So we'll start with our darker colors and move into some lighter colors. Squeeze out a little yellow, a little white for me here as well. And let's mix some colors so we've got them ready to roll. Grab a bright brush or a nice brush for mixing. You can mix with a palette knife too. We're going to use some phthalo blue plain and dark, but we're also going to take some white into some phthalo blue and mix a bit of a lighter color, maybe even a lighter color still. So plain dark phthalo blue. And then you can have a range of lights and darks here. I want you to rinse off your brush. And let's add a little bit of our yellow to some of our lighter blue. So I've just moved a little bit of my lighter blue, phthalo blue plus white, which makes a beautiful teal. Let's start by adding some green or yellow, and it will make a lovely green. And depending on how much yellow you add or how much blue you add. So if I have more yellow, it's going to be almost a grassy green. And if I have more blue, it will look more of like a teal color. So both of these colors come from a mixture of phthalo blue and yellow. This has more blue, this has more yellow. I should add that the colors will just smoosh around as we mix them. So I like to do my first pass with a sea sponge. So I'm going to come into some plain phthalo blue without any white in it. And I'm going to start tapping up and around. So, you know, we might have one seaweed kind of swooping off to the side. So I might start to tap some of this color. I'm using enough paint that I can move this around easily and spend some time blending it before it dries. But not so much that I have big, thick gobs. So I've kind of pulled the direction of the seaweed up there. And I'm just going to kind of make an all over shape of which the details will sit into. And this is so dark, it's very subtle with the sponging. So just the blue on the black. And this is going to help us start to blend some of our other colors in. Let's get a blue that's maybe just a little bit lighter. And I want you to kind of think of maybe the direction. Like we've got this little bit of seaweed wrapping up and around and then like swooping almost off the page and then back up a little bit using my second lightest blue. You can tap your sponge off if you want to blend the color without adding more. You can push lightly with just a little paint on your sponge to get more of a blended look. And the harder you push, the more paint will come off of your sponge. So again, this is really subtle. I'm going to come up over here. I'm going to say maybe we'll have a little seaweed. It's going to draw that shape in. I might tap my sponge off a little bit and then kind of pull some, like I'm going to pull in these directions like this, but I might tap instead of dragging to get a bit more of like a corally kind of look, or a soft, ephemeral kind of look. And I like this because it's like, is it outer space or is it under the sea? And I don't know about you, but when I learn about creatures under the sea and the history of Earth, where a lot of life, well, life basically starts in the ocean with when the world had no oxygen, and then oxygen comes from the water into the atmosphere. So life really starts down there, and it's just wild how many different types of life there are, and they are so different from us. I almost feel like this is our little aliens. And seahorses too, these cute little aliens that can turn their head side to side or their eyes all around. And so we can start to get these more abstract shapes. Layering some lighter spots into some darker spots. Now the sponge is a tool that will get a lot of color on quickly, but it is a kind of a large texture. You won't get refined marks from this. You will get overall large swaths of texture. If we want to start creating some more refined marks, we need to switch brushes, and we're going to try our bristly fan brush. So I'm going to take the sponge. If you want to reuse your sponge, just stick it in some water until you are ready to clean your brushes. Then you can clean this off and use it again. Now I want us to come into our fan brush, and here we can start pulling in some of our other colors, maybe some of our greens. I want to mix a bit of a darker green too, with some yellows and blues. So I might take my fan brush here and tap in a little bit of green. If your background is starting to dry, now is the time that you can squeeze out a little bit of glazing liquid as well. And we might use that to soften in some of our edges here. So I'm going to pull some green up. Kind of the trajectory of the seaweed might be coming up and off this way. And I've got this color on here. So I want to soften the edges in with this brush. So I'm going to rinse off my fan brush and maybe dip the tip into some glazing liquid. And here we can start to push the edges of our paint. You can use water too. Scrub it around. Maybe even take a little from here over here, and I'm just kind of following some of the shapes that I already have made. The nice thing about having a clean, damp brush is we can kind of pull and lift color too and move it all around. So my brush is clean and I can just scrub this out and around. Rinse that brush, tap it off. So I can use this brush to come in and even lift color if I want to. You can also take a clean, damp sponge and continue to tap into your color, and you can lift areas and you can soften areas. Okay, so you can use your water or your glazing liquid to help soften your colors together. Lifting color, moving it around. I want you to just get some really fun organic marks that evoke under the sea to you. So I'm going to keep playing around with mine here. Adding the color on, rinsing my brush. Don't forget you can lift color with a sponge, a mostly clean, damp sponge like this. Just rubbing into it, tapping into it. So I'm trying to get a little shape that kind of flows up and off, but still not any like line work. This is still all basic form. Even this paint that I've let mostly dry over here, I can still come in and move it around and lift areas with a damp sponge. If you don't have a sponge, you can use a damp paper towel like I have here. You would just ball it up and use it in that same way. You can lift color, ball it up for a smaller area, like if I want to make a little band coming in like this with the darks. This is a really fun and fluid way to make texture. No planning required. Just put that paint down, start tapping away. In the beginning of this process, you might start with lots of paint and maybe you've rubbed some away. Like that's one of the fun things about starting with lots of paint is you can rub some away if you don't like where it is. But as you keep on working your painting, I want you to start using a little less paint. I want you to work getting a shape that you like. So here is up close. on mine. It looks quite different than farther away because of the black background. The colors can start to look quite dry when they darken or when the light isn't hitting them at the right angle. So if I were to change the angle or come really close, you can see some of those colors a bit more. You can see these textures that I'm tapping in. Now from where the angle my head is at, these look quite dark, but from the angle to you, they look light. It just depends where the camera's hitting. And again, one of the most beautiful things about working on a black base is the way colors disappear and reappear. Now my paint is getting to that point where it's sticky and it's mostly dry. My sponge is wet, but just kind of damp. And we've got this overall, we want you to work towards having these overall drifting, almost smoke-like or nebulous shapes of these colors. And yours could be quite different in color than mine. Maybe yours are more green, maybe yours are more blue. It's more, I want you to get a nice flow, because into this, we are going to blow some paint with our straws. So now we're done with our sponges, and I'm going to plop my sponge into the water and I will wash those and reuse them later on. Feel free to zone in to this section of the painting and pause if you need to or want to, or you can watch the tutorial through and kind of get a gist of where we're going with this. At this point in the painting, I like to do some little bubbles by splatter painting into this background. If you've never splatter painted before, we do want our paint to be really, really runny. I'm going to spray the tops of my paints with my water bottle to make sure that they stay nice and hydrated. And then let's take a little toothpaste-sized dollop of our white. A little something like this. And I'm going to drip water into it. So I just dip my brush into water, and don't worry about the color in your water. At least kind of a 50-50. And I know we're all starting out with a different viscosity of paint. So another analogy would be like this should be as runny as 2% milk. So it will run off the paint. Or maybe like Homo milk, like 3.8%. Quite fluid. And the reason we make our paint fluid to splatter it to get little bubble effects or star effects or sparkling effects is because when the paint is thin, it kind of disperses everywhere. If the paint is thick, it creates like lines, more like a Jackson Pollock where there's lines everywhere. When we want little dots, the thinness helps that paint disperse and spread out into little dots. Now, one of my favorite ways to splatter is just with my finger. I typically get paint on my hands in a painting session. So one way to splatter is just to take your brush and pull the bristles back. I'm usually about a foot away from my canvas when I want all over splatter, and just pull like this. Pull, pull, pull. If you're getting long lines instead of dots, just add a bit more water. The other way is just to take another brush and just tap it like this. Okay, much fun with the splattering. So working in those layers. Once we have our stars on, I like to use a script liner brush and pull out some basic line work for the seaweed shapes. So a little structure. So, we want it to maybe bend over and up and have a couple of branches coming off. And then these really organic marks where it's really going all over the place is achieved with the straw. So a mixture of our hand for a more purposeful composition, and then the straw to really enhance that organic texture. And corals are nothing if not really organic shapes. You can go in and start plotting out those areas with the script liner brush now. However, you can wipe away mistakes with a wet brush. But if we try to wipe our mistake away with the stars wet, we'll smudge them all over like this. So I like to give this a little blast just in case, if you want to wipe up a mark. So let's give this a little dry before we proceed to the next step. I'm going to show you the best way to use your script liner. If you go into paint that is its regular consistency, it's not going to go very far. The long bristles on this brush are designed to soak up paint. So they're designed to soak up really fluid paint. So if I just dip it in this yellow, the brush isn't going to soak it up. So you want to be working with a consistency that's similar to the consistency we use for our splatter painting. In fact, we could actually use that same paint for this. So it's so runny that when I dip my brush in, I get this, just soaks it right up. And if you've not used this brush, I've got white, so I'll show you on my hand, but you can go for a long ways, and the curved nature of this brush allows you to do beautiful curvy lines that are quite thin. If I push thicker, it will be thick, thinner, it will be thin. Okay, but you can get these beautiful branching shapes with a script liner brush. So go ahead and add a little bit of water to your paint if you don't have any more of that really, really runny consistency. If you have your favorite painty day beverage, it's a great time for a sip. I've got a green matcha tea here with some ginger and honey in it. It is good. It's always nice to have a little beverage while you're painting. All right, so I'm going to come into this paint here. Now is a good time to start thinking about where that seahorse is. So, I'm going to have my central third here for where the seahorse is going to be. So I want to pull some of my marks on the outside of this here. So I'm going to take my brush and maybe I'll start right here and come up and off. And now I'm going to start using some of my background marks. I'm going to make one more mark over here just to make sure I'm kind of in the right spot. Then I'll remove these. And I'm going to come up close. Lots of water in this paint, so it's probably going to dry really nice and see-through. So from here, we might want to work with what we have. So maybe we branch off. I'm kind of seeing some shapes up here and kind of staying on the inside of some of these marks that I've already made. Think of this as little V shapes to create a central line, and then you can kind of come off of the line, little V shapes or Y shapes. I've had a lot of practice with my script liner, so if you're new to the brush and you're feeling a little bit insecure about the marks it's going to make, my biggest recommendation is to get a scrap piece of paper. And if you're using white paper, then just go ahead and use a darker color to practice with so it shows up really well. But you can practice these little lines. And I like the way this looks, but I really love the way the straw blow looks. To blow with the straw, I find it goes well with this and it just adds that unpredictable element. So if you are nervous about needing to wipe something off, dry this layer before you blow with the straw. I'm going to come right in here and we're going to do this all in the white. To get the color after, we're going to use some see-through glaze painting to add those colors on top. For now, I'm adding even more water into some of this. And with that script liner, I'm going to maybe put a really watery line kind of coming right up, right where we were. Maybe I'll even trace this line with some even more runny paint. And then, so I've added some really runny paint. You can see it moving around when I run it, maybe this whole line. I'm going to blow it, and the direction I blow it is the direction it will go. I'm going to blow quite hard. So here we go. And then I get all of these really exciting and unpredictable shapes in here that really remind me of actual corals. It's going to dry quite see-through because of the water that we have in the paint. So this will be a really subtle effect. Maybe I'll just add a dot of it here and see what happens. This time I'm going to blow it this way. And you're going to see it starting to dry really nice and see-through. I want a couple of these little ones coming up in this corner. Maybe even I want a new one coming up here. Yeah. It's a bit unpredictable, so if you're the kind of person that feels nervous with the unpredictable, then this will be a fun exercise for you. Just embrace the unpredictable. Or of course, you can stick just with the line drawing like this. But I found it really fun learning to try to control the paint and where it went and never quite knowing what will happen. And typically the way I approach this type of painting, where it's not like photorealism, it's got a bit of a magical feel to it, I'll do something and then I stop. I'm like, okay, brain, what did we do? Do we like how it looks? Can we make it look better if we don't? Can we try to learn one more thing today if we do? So I think of it more kind of like an experiment. And I like to ask questions along the way. Like we're all these scientists. The experiment is how to make our experiments not look like shit to us. So I'm going to put one more dollop down here. And experiment with blowing softly and more with more force. It has a different effect. Like I would never have thought to curve these lines up like this. And I like that little unpredictability. And don't be afraid to enhance some of these. If you like where it's going, you can go into some more of your paint and add to those lines or drag a line out even more. Or add any texture that you're liking that's popping out at you from the organic shapes that you've created or that your straw has created for you. We're going to let this dry and we're going to pull a few colors on here before getting into the Seahorse drawing and painting section of this tutorial. So I'm going to grab my blow dryer and I'm going to give this a blast. Don't forget to keep spritzing your paints to make sure that they do not dry out. With the light misting on top. If your lines are really, really wet still and you don't want the blow dryer to push them all over, you're just going to hold the blow dryer up quite high, like 1.5 feet away. Now we can add some different colors into our seaweed and enhance what we've got. So we've got some lovely layers in here. Up close, you can see the layer below that help direct our course for these organic line work. And now we can tint these with some color. You can use some of your greens, some of your blues, and for this layer of glaze painting, we are going to use glazing liquid. We're going to mix our colors about 50-50. So I might have a little patch for my green. I already have some here for my blue. And you can take any brush, like a little fan or number 6 bright. And I'm going to start with some of this greenish color. And I'm going to mix it 50-50 with the glazing liquid. So we want to make sure this is really dry. So when you touch it, I don't want you to be able to move it around at all. And now when we come over top, this paint will dry see-through and will allow what we see to shine through. So think about this kind of following the shapes. Once you get a nice bit of color on there, if you want to move this color around and blend it in, pull the color on, and then use a clean brush and you can just soften it into the background. So kind of just enhancing what we've already got here. You can make a 50-50 mix with, say, some of your dark green color here as well. You can also go 50-50 water if you do not have glazing liquid. If you want to darken an area, you can go into the dark phthalo blue over top. So maybe I'll come over here with some of the dark phthalo blue. Again, it's 50-50 mix. If I use light phthalo blue, 50-50, it's going to be a lighter area like we have here. And I might use some of that light phthalo blue and just pull it right over kind of the main stem of the seaweed. And you can add further texture. Like I can tap along the straw lines and enhance what's underneath. as long as you're 50-50 with your mix and you drag it out, so there's that color on there, and then I can drag it out with a clean brush or a sponge, you're going to be able to see what's underneath. So you can really enhance what you've got on here. If you want it to get darker towards the top of the shape, get in there with that darker blue. Sherry says, I love seahorses, so I had to tip to own this painting. I've stood and watched them in the aquarium. The leafy dragon just behind blends into the plants. They do have an organic shape to them, don't they? And we can see some of the colors and shapes mirrored into the seaweed. I'm going to add some water to one of my, not my fully darkest blue, but some darker blues, like really runny paint. And I might even add just some dollops of watery blue. So taking that 50-50 mix, layering over top. The glazing liquid, especially when you, even though I added a really light blue here, because it's 50-50 with that glazing liquid, when I push it out, you'll see the marks from your straw down below. I might blend it with some dark blue coming towards this black center. And what I love about the glazing liquid is even when you come over the stars, so if you look at this area up here, you can see there's blue, but the stars show through all of this glazing liquid as well. I'm gonna pull some green in here. And if you ever don't like a direction that your painting has gone, you can just take some dark blue or even some black. I hope you enjoy this texturizing stuff. You can use these techniques for any kind of sea painting, but also outer space. These techniques work really well for the glazing and the layering. I don't know about you, but I could just play with this part of the painting all day. And don't forget, up close, there is considerable more color in this section. Now we're going to let this dry and we're going to sketch on our seahorse. Now with drawing, I always recommend you practice on a piece of scrap paper first. So I never go straight to my canvas, or I almost never do, especially if it's something that I have never drawn before. I take some time and I sketch out my subject. It's usually, you know, if it's a first time, it's going to look really rough, maybe the first or second time. But the more you do it, the more you're going to be like, okay, the head needs to be a bit smaller. My first seahorse, the neck came up really high and it looked not quite right. So just keep looking and figuring it out and experimenting. If you're looking and you're like, I don't quite know what looks off, keep looking and then eventually just try something. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to be like, okay, I'm not sure what is off, but my intuition tells me the belly's a bit too long or the whole thing's a little bit too wide. So then you're just going to experiment until it looks the way you like it. We can also work at breaking things down into basic shapes. So I like doing really rough sketches. Like here's a seahorse scribble. I just draw really rough lines and I keep changing the lines until it looks the way I like it. So feel free to follow along with me as we go ahead and sketch ourselves a seahorse. Now I almost always start with a line down the kind of center. That line will really be down the center of our canvas, so you can kind of see where parts like the tail comes over one side, the back almost looks like a little soft sideways M shape, or however this little wiggle, boom, boom, boom. The fin is essentially in the center, so look for relationships when you're drawing. The fin is in the center. And if we look how far the nose and the tail come out, well, look, the nose and the tail come out about the same width. So let's start with a line. And then we can use this little line as a reference. So draw a line and you can be really sketchy with this. Draw really lightly, and then when you get lines that you like, darken the lines that are in the proper proportions. So kind of in the middle of the seahorse, we said that's where kind of that fin comes out. And the head really sits to the left of this line. And I kind of blocked it out almost like a little triangle shape around the head. So on this side of the seahorse, it's like a triangle shape kind of comes out like this. It's kind of looking down. And then the back, it has this really kind of soft curve. And the back kind of comes in behind the line down here. Whoops, like this. Comes in behind. And then that tail curls up and sits in line with the nose. So the tail kind of curls forward. And then curls in a little something like this. And the back at the middle here kind of starts to hump up, and the neck kind of comes towards the head. So this kind of looks like that back curve, like a soft M shape coming off of this line. Maybe I see a little bit of width in between the fin and the back. So my line was touching. I'm going to give that little bit of width here. Distance, that is, between the central line and the back. So I'm just being really sketchy and coming out. And if this represents the head, you know, there's this kind of triangle shape here, about half of the head is where the eye is. Whoops, come back. About half of the head is where this eye is, and the other half, forgive my seahorse anatomy, I'm going to call it a snout or a mouth or a nose. I'm not sure. This section, this trumpet shape, I think it's a mouth. I'm pretty sure. I'm going to have to look that up later. Kind of comes off a little something like this. And there's a little kind of lip on the end. So we'll draw the basic shapes before we draw all these little spikes and frilly bits. And then the neck, again, my first seahorse, my neck came way up and it didn't look right. So you can benefit from my experience. The neck comes pretty much straight out like this, but it's not really skinny. If we look at this center line here, the neck really starts bending forward right on this central line. So then the neck right on the central line starts bending forward. And when I'm looking at the body of the seahorse, I try to suss out where the fattest part of the body is. And it really is kind of just above the back fin here. So we decided our fin would be about this central area. So kind of the fattest part of the seahorse might be around here. And I just give these little placeholders to kind of help my brain block things into basic shapes. And I want you to do the same. And then here's the curve of the belly coming in towards our line. That's kind of this curve here, getting close to the tail where it hits the line, the central line here, before it starts swirling out again. So it kind of hits, kind of eases into here, and now it starts coming out, and the tail's going to get smaller quite quickly. Then we've got this tiny little spiral, just one little curl in, and we can change the width until we think it looks good to us. So we're going to go for a shape, a little something like this. There'll be the little eye shape here, and the little fin shape will come off like this. And this is going to be the basic shape, okay? And then, from here, there's going to be lots of little lines that come through the seahorse and these little spikes coming off, but we'll worry about the orientation of these after we sketch in this shape. So hopefully by now your background is dry or mostly dry. When we add glazing liquid to our paint, it not only makes it see-through, it also slows down the dry time. And this is why it makes it one of the most useful mediums for acrylic. Because remember, sometimes we want our paint to not dry so quickly. And, blending, and if you want to blend for a longer time, like with an oil paint, when we want that paint to be blendable for a long time, adding this medium to it can help with that. So if you're someone that finds your paint is always drying before you're done blending, you can kind of add this to the edges of your paint, or like we did, right into the paint. And it's a lovely blending aid as well as for creating the see-through glazes. The downside to that is sometimes your paint can take longer to dry when you're itching to get on to the next step. That's when having a little blow dryer like the one I have is really handy. Let's give this a blast, and we're going to sketch the seahorses on our background. The most important area to be dry is that central area. Let's take a quick swig of our favorite painty day beverage. You're going to want a light colored pencil, and you're going to want chalk or watercolor pencil. If you have anything waxy like a pencil crayon, the acrylic paint can be repelled from anything that's waxy like a pencil crayon. So if you love painting with acrylic, you might want to invest in a chalk pencil of some kind. And yes, sewing pencils will work. People often ask if they can use their sewing pencils, and it doesn't matter if it's light blue or white. It's just got to be a bit lighter than the black. So what I want us to do here is draw a really light, we're going to break this really lightly into thirds. On the 12 by 12 inch square, the seahorse really does fit very beautifully into thirds, and it will help us get this dimension and with the nose and the tail fitting right into a third. And that will translate if you're using any square. So if you're using an 8 by 8 square and you like doing mini paintings, or if you're going big, you could do this quite easily on like a 16 by 16 or even a 20 by 20 inch square. And then you can still use your thirds for that. So I'm going to lightly block this into thirds, and you can measure your thirds or you can eye it out. I like eyeing it out, and I find it easiest to use some brushes to get that initial measurement. So definitely here. And then over here. So I'm going to lightly come down into some thirds here. You can draw even lighter than me, just light enough for you to see the lines. And we can do thirds this way as well. So 1, 2, 3 stripes, giving ourselves kind of approximate squares. And you want to make sure your background is dry before pushing with a pencil very hard. This will also help us place our center line. And you can draw your line as long as you want your seahorse to be. So mine really fills the page. So I start really close to the top and really close to the bottom. And I would aim for a similar width. So if I have this much space down here, a similar amount of space at the top, give or take a few millimeters. Now, if we were to come into these vertical thirds, you see both the tail and the nose hit at this vertical third, and the fin on this side hits at that vertical third. Now let's just focus on the line of the seahorse now. So if I were to put a pencil from top to bottom on the seahorse, like from here to here, and if I were to find halfway down the line, the fin comes out kind of right at this line. It's just kind of sits above that halfway point. So here's the line from here to here for the seahorse's body. So we can make ourselves a little mark to indicate where the fin comes out. So if I come halfway down, that's here. I know that my little fin is going to sit somewhere kind of on top of that line. So I might just really lightly roughen that little shape. Okay, so we have one little mark to help us place our seahorse in space. I'm going to put this burgundy brush representing the line down the center. The head sits to the left at the top. And remember, we kind of had a little triangle shape. And you're going to pull that triangle shape coming down to this first horizontal third. I want it to sit on the line a little something like this. This is going to represent the face. And then let's focus on this back curve. So we'll kind of come out flat. And notice how it curves down towards where our fin comes out. Kind of comes out almost all the way to the third, doesn't it? It comes out pretty far to this line. And then it arcs in kind of towards the fin, where it's not quite touching this center line, this little shape like this. And then with the tail, unlike the head of the seahorse, the tail doesn't quite touch this outside third here. It kind of, it's a little bit of a smaller bump. And that's this line here coming down to the bottom. And then this tail really kind of arcs up and then it hits this line. And for this lower third here, the tail actually sits, doesn't quite hit this line. It sits a little bit below. And it's kind of like a little curl in. Now we're going to swoop the tail in behind this line a little bit. The fattest part of the seahorse is kind of right around where this fin is. It's like right about here. And notice the belly doesn't hit this line, this outside third here. So let's start under the head, which really sits kind of like right on the line or just a little bit behind the center line here. We're going to come out and we're going to get wide. And one thing I like to look at is the negative space, or kind of how the black spaces fit into here as well. So it's really quite a thin gap under the chin of the black. And then the belly, it really kind of arcs up. It gets quite big. It doesn't quite hit. And then it comes down towards the center line, right about at this third here, this lower third line. So here it's really starting to arc back in towards that center line. And you can swoop it just a little bit in behind the center line before coming up and then doing a lovely kind of curl in for the tail to get small. So we've got our body on. Nice seahorse shape. We don't need our guidelines anymore. But when you're drawing, measuring, trying to find out where half is, breaking things into basic shapes, and you don't have to draw to paint. You may, of course, trace anything you want to paint. And there's lots of modern day devices to make that really easy, like old school, like tracing paper, to now there's even apps you get on your phone. The nice thing that drawing does is it gives you the freedom to just pull things out of your head, and it really helps to understand how you drew the shape when you come to filling it in with the paint, because drawing trains your mind to understand volume and line, and these things can add to your painting practice. Every painter is different, but I know for me, when I started to draw, it gave me a little bit more freedom, like a little bit more of a vocabulary, like more words to work with. In painting is just a form of expression, and every new technique you learn or you enjoy is you adding a little bit more to your artistic vocabulary. Let's do a little bit more defining on the head. So here's our triangle shape right here, and about halfway down that triangle shape is where that snout comes out. So we've got our little head shape here. And then it really comes down a little bit before we've got that little bit of a raised edge. I don't know what they eat, but I imagine them sucking up little krill or something. We're going to fill this in with a base color. before we start getting into the texture. I want you to take your time and get the proportions looking good to you. Get a little swirl. The nice thing about the chalk is you can just use a little bit of a damp paper towel and rub the lines away. I'll show you how that looks. So here I've got a little paper towel. I'll dip it into my water, which is quite blue, but that won't affect the painting at all. So here's the damp paper towel, and then just rub off the chalk really lightly. Just don't push too hard in case the background hasn't quite dried all the way. Okay, so you can, the same thing goes. I'm just erasing the back lines, but if you feel like you made something you need to correct, you can do this too. Like I might tweak my tail spiral. I'm gonna lighten the lines or remove them a bit. We're gonna fill this in with a nice light blue color before we start adding some of the fun texture of their skin. I like using a 1/4 inch flat brush for the body, a little 0 round brush for the tail, and the little bristly fan brush fits perfectly into the fin, so you can just do it in like one stroke. So here's the trio of the best basic brushes that I think are fun to play with, but use whatever you have in your collection. And basically, if you can see the brush fitting really nicely into the space, use it. We're going to use a light blue, so phthalo blue with white, like this color here. And don't worry about pulling in the spiky edges. The first coat is just going to be quite basic here. So I'm not going to do any of the little frilly bits on the head. I'm just going to fill in the basic shape. So the basic shape of the head is kind of this soft triangle. Like this, and then into a little snout. You can add a bit of a darker blue right in behind the head if you don't want to lose where the back of the head becomes the body. Then you're going to come right back into this lighter color and fill in the body shape. Your body will get a little bit bigger when we add the little spiky detail into the body. I'm filling in all the big parts of the seahorse, because when I get to the little spiral of the tail, we're going to want to switch to a smaller brush. You can grab a little round brush. I like to have the tail slowly taper. Something almost like mathematical about a seahorse's spirally tail. I like to look at the negative space in this spiral, like the black space in between is smaller and then gets bigger as it opens into that vast ocean. Take a little bit of white and add it to some of your ultramarine blue. It should still be a pretty dark color. A little something like this color. And use your bristly fan brush. I took this little bristly fan and I laid the whole brush onto the painting. I pulled in. It's going to be really thin where it comes out of the body. And you can just use the whole fat side of the brush. If you like, and pull in a little seahorse fin shape. There are 3 segments in the horse's body. 1, 2, 3, and they're almost like vertical lines. So I think of these right just below the fin, right in the biggest part of the seahorse. These lines will be kind of equal, and I'm using my ultramarine blue mix here. So this is the only spot right here where the lines are sort of equal. Then the front of the belly kind of disappears in behind, and from here on down the tail, this line will split it into just 2 segments that are pretty much equal going down the rest of the body. But at the top here, here's the belly. The line's going to get a little bit smaller under the chin. And we can switch to a little detail brush, a little round brush for lines might be a bit easier. Okay, so under here, we've got these sort of segments. And the leftover space here, I'm going to go for about equal lines, equal space on each side. That's what I mean by that. So equal space kind of coming down the tail. And then when it gets really small, we'll just kind of lose that line in towards the center here. The light is coming from above this seahorse, and you can tell because the ridges on the body come out and there's going to be shadows down below these ridges. So the shadow side on the tail, maybe like under here, the light's kind of shining down from the top. So you might get a little bit of a shadow underneath this tail here, which I'm going to represent with just a little ultramarine blue. And it might be a little bit more shadowy under here because again, the light's coming down from the top. So it's going to hit this opening. So under here, we might get a bit more of this ultramarine blue. It's a bit more shadowy, say. And maybe along the back, a little more shadowy. And this will help blend into this little fin here, which is also that ultramarine blue. We've got to build up these kind of basic layers before we can get to the fun of the detail layers. That's always the case with paintings. First comes the base coat, the underpainting, before we can get into all the fun. I'm just doing this back area a little darker, just to start getting a little depth and dimension. Take a little white into some of your light phthalo blue. And we'll do a little bit of detailing into the seahorse's face. So right around the top, there's going to be a little eye, and I'm going to do some little dots of texture. The eye is kind of right before we hit the snout. The light is coming from above, so I'm going to take some of this light blue into the top of the snout and some little taps around the eye. And maybe even a little light blue into the little mouth part. And then we've got some of these little, add some water to some of this light blue. And we've got some of these little details on the seahorse's head. I'm going to have mine kind of maybe flowing backwards a little bit. A small one, and then maybe 3 bigger ones. 1, 2, and I'm going to just do some little taps with the light blue down into the head to blend it in. Blending isn't always just smearing colors together. Sometimes it's just creating a soft transition between a light color to a darker color. And that can be like stippling in little dots, like we're doing here. Now there's going to be some details here. I want you to do some of these little spikies kind of coming down the face and curling under the chin. And then a few of those little shapes are going to come under the chin too. Let me wiggle in a little closer here. Okay, so just a few of these little, just trailing off. Tap in a little bit of this light blue texture. And it kind of mimics this shapes of the corals. Can even take a little bit of your watery white into the top of the mouth here. Okay, good. Let's allow this layer to dry so we can use our white chalk pencil to sketch on some of the ridges on the seahorse's body. Be sure to spray your paints to keep them hydrated on the palette, just a light dusting of water, and let's give this a dry. grab your white chalk pencil. And what I want you to do is find the line on the seahorse's body that looks a little bit like it might be kind of flat. My outside line curved a little bit, but the line under the seahorse's wing is a little bit flat. And then the rest of these are going to kind of come up and follow the curve. Now, we're going to bend towards whatever way the body is bending. So the next line, his head is bending forward, so the lines come forward. Down here, we're bending backwards, so the lines are going to kind of start angling backwards this way, tilting forward again. So the lines tilting forward and so on and so forth. So we'll give a little more character to these lines, but we're going to start with a relatively flat line under the seahorse's fin. Now we're going to start to angle up this way. And about here, we're starting to bend this back towards the head. So you'll notice it's a little bit wider here and angling up towards the head here. Now I'm angling down this way as we bend over, and the lines are going to get really small and close together as we start coming down the tail. You can also draw the lines that you have coming vertically down the seahorse's body as well, like this. We'll have some lines coming through the fin. So draw one that's relatively straight through the fin, and then we might kind of spread out and fan out through the fin. The lines on the back of the seahorse's body here, all of these are going to have little spikes to them. So even the little cells kind of inside the body are going to kind of come to these little spiky points like this. And we're definitely going to have that on the outside of the body. So little spikes. Kind of coming out where these lines come out. So where the lines come out, we're just going to connect. And same thing on the outside of the body. Now you can draw all of this on, but we can also just get right in there with our paint color. So I'm going to use a really, really light paint. Grab your 0 round brush for this. And let's go into some white. Make it really runny, so add lots of water. It will be easier to create the thin, curved lines. I'm starting on the outside of the body here. I'm going to paint some really little lines through the tail here. Now, when we start doing the sections inside of the body, these aren't perfect squares. There's going to be some shape to these. So just like the little spikes are curved on the outside, we're going to get some curves on the inside as well. So some of these might kind of curve down. I want you to take your script liner brush. Once you're done the lines down the outside, add some water to some white if you don't have any runny white left. Let that script liner soak up a little bit of runny white. And then we can pull. I'm going to tap my brush off so it's just got a little bit of paint on it. And then we can pull some of these structural lines into the seahorse's fin. Good. Let's add some fun orange color into this seahorse. Pour out some of your cadmium orange and a tiny little dollop of some of your cadmium red medium hue as well. We'll need a little bit of white for some of our orange. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of orange and white together. And I'm going to add some of this into some of these sections of our seahorse. We're going to put some highlights through these center lines, like the lines that went in here. So don't worry if you go over those a little bit. Right now, we're just adding some fun color into these bodies. So I kind of let it peter off a little bit in certain areas. As I come to the top of the neck here, I might just come along the upper and left-hand side of some of the sections and maybe pick up a little bit more in the neck up here. I might take some of this orange color. I'm going to add water in it to help it flow, and maybe add some of this into some of these sections, you know, along the highlight side, the side that's catching the sun. So down below, that's the side away from the sun. So I might just tap some little bits of this light orange, letting some of the blue show through where the light is hitting. Now there's going to be light at the top of the tail here. Maybe a little, just tapping a little bit in. To the sections. Before we brighten our colors, I want us to add some shadows to define these segments. So the light is coming down from the top like this. So really hitting the tips of these ridges, which the ridges are kind of swooping out and up. So light's hitting here. So there's a little shadow underneath these ridges here and a little shadow on the inside of these ridges here. So there's these little shadows on the texture sections of the seahorse's body, and we'll add those in to start creating volume. We'll use some glazing liquid so the shadows aren't like solid lines. You can still see color underneath of a shadow. So if a shadow's falling on green grass, you can still see the color of the grass through the shadow of a tree. So a shadow of a tree would often be a darker green. So the shadows on the seahorse are going to be a darker blue or a darker orange. And we'll add the glazing liquid so we can see a lot of what we painted already shining through. For the shadow color, I like to take some of my cadmium orange and mix it with some plain dark phthalo blue. It almost creates like a warm brown color. Start with orange and add just a little bit of the blue. And then when you get that kind of warm brown color, you can mix it 50-50 with your glazing liquid. Now, if you want a cooler shadow, just add more blue to your orange mix. Okay. So I'm going to take this shadow color, so just a little bit underneath some of your segments. Getting into our details here. You can pull some of your paint on your brush and then tap your brush off so you've got just like a little bit of paint on your brush. Don't want to overdo it. Okay, so under. There's the shadow. Under here. Under here. Under. You can add a little bit more orange to your shadow color for these orange segments, if you like. But the shadow in these is going to come underneath, but a little bit on this side as well, where the ridge of this section here is creating a little shadow down the left-hand side and underneath. And it will be the same thing for the shadows in these ones. They're going to come a little bit down the left-hand side as well as underneath. Don't worry about losing some of those white lines, because we are going to pull those back in. We need to build up these medium values before we can add the little details, the white details back in. Okay, so pulling those shadows in. The glazing liquid will keep it nice and soft. Now, while we're here, I'm going to take a little bit of a lighter blue color into my fin. I might redo those white lines because I want the base to be a little bit lighter. Maybe even a bit of the light phthalo blue with a bit of the ultramarine. I want my fin to pop out a little more. And I'm going to take some of this cadmium orange with some white, and I'm going to make a little bit of a lighter cadmium orange color. And I'm gonna, you can mix either some water or some glazing liquid in here. And let's do some little dollops into the face. Maybe a little along the top of the nose. I'm going to take some of my cadmium orange with the white into these segments. And I'm going to let my shadow color shine through. I'm going to kind of highlight the lower section because these swoop out. So letting it be shadowy towards the tops of these segments. Let's do the same with some light blue in the belly of the seahorse. So we want it to go from a lighter blue to that shadow color in some of, especially this strip here that's really right at the front. Let's just lighten it up a little bit. That was some of our phthalo blue and white. So here is one section. Here's the bottom of the section. And let's just feather some of this lighter blue up towards that shadowy color. This will all start to look more clean when we get the white lines back on, but for now, just think about adding some highlights into these segments. And we get back into some orange down here. So creating some more depth in our paintings. Squeeze out a tiny little bit of black for me. And now we're going to get into some highlights in the outside of the seahorse. And then we'll see if we want to do any final tweaky deakies in the color. And I almost always have little tweaky deakies to do to get it looking brighter. But the white lines around the tops of the ridges will really, really help brighten everything up. We're going to add a little black for the eye using a small little 0 round brush and just the tiniest bit of black. The eye is really close to where the nose meets or the face, kind of the head meets the snout, mouth. Let's do some little taps in there. Okay. And by the way, I added a little bit of black around my fin because I had big things of seaweed going in to my seahorse, and it was really light colored seaweeds. And I really wanted the seahorse to pop. So you can use see-through black. so that we can get a nice soft transition. If you take a little segment of black, and I know the glazing liquid looks white when we pour it out, but I promise it will dry super duper clear. I'm going to take a brush like maybe this mini fan. I'm just going to mix a little bit of 50-50 black to glazing liquid with just a little paint on the brush. And then if we want to clean up some of these shapes, this is how it's done. So I'll start, like maybe I want this little area to be a bit skinnier where the shape of the fin comes out. Or maybe I want to create more ridges. Okay, so we got the black on there. Rinse off your brush. Use some water or plain glazing liquid to feather the black out. I just want it to fade into that seaweed. So anywhere that you might feel you want to do a little tweak, like maybe under the chin, you need to, this is the negative space of the painting. The positive space is the seahorse itself. Maybe I'll make under here a little bit more black. Or maybe the frillies on your head are a little big and you want to make them smaller. In case you can, whoops, I'm losing my snout. And then we don't want the black to look like a solid line. We want it to look like it's just fading off and blending in with the rest of the background, okay? I might do a few of these little marks now before we add the white. It's a lovely way to finish off the painting. And just wherever you've got the black edge, don't leave a harsh edge. We don't want to look like we've rimmed it in black. We want to look like we purposefully painted the background black. And anyone who didn't create the painting doesn't know that we did this at the end, so it shouldn't look stripey. And here you can still see those little stars shining through because, or bubbles, I should say. Glazing liquid is super magical for allowing background to show through. So even if, you know, you got a, maybe your seahorse grew as you painted it and you're like, oh no, it's a little bit bigger in one spot than you intended, you can use this technique for any of those little tweaks. So softening the line with some water, glazing liquid, will be kind of a line to help get the edge clean and then soften. And you can use a see-through black anywhere. Like if you went too wild with segments of your background and you want to tone them down too, you can. Okay. I know the layering is lots of layering, but that can give such a beautiful life to your paintings. And with this kind of layering in a painting, it looks so different in person. You can see the light coming through these layers because the glazing liquid is clear polymer. So each subsequent layer of paint you add with the glazing liquid will sit on top of the paint in a way that it doesn't with water, because when the water evaporates, the paint really flattens out. So using glazing liquid, you can really get kind of a luminous quality to your paint that you get with oil paint, because the oil creates that lovely separation between layers. If you want to do some darkening here, this is such a see-through layer. I'm just kind of adding a few sections of dark and then fading it out. Now the highlight layer will be really the final layer in this painting. So let's go ahead. Give this a dry and get into the final highlights. First, we'll do the white lines and then any tweaky deakies. I'm going to give this a blast with the blow dryer. Now let's make this little guy pop and shine. It's going to come right out of the background with the contrast of these final lines. Add water to some white. It's likely evaporated out from earlier. We'll get and pull your brush down to a thin fin, okay? So we want to have a nice little tip to our brush. The strongest light, because these are really the tops of these ridges, we're going to get a lot of strong light on these vertical, not vertical, sorry, these are horizontal bands. But also on the vertical ones that come in between. You can even wiggle a little bit of the white up. If you add some glazing liquid into your white, again, that 50-50 mix. Then we'll get a color that's a little bit softer, that kind of transitions into the background a little better. Sometimes they'll even in the very front pieces kind of pull some of the white up towards the shadows. If you want to blend that in, you'll just need to use a clean damp brush to kind of fade it in towards those shadows. And put the little lines back into your fins. Remember, runny paint will move more fluidly than thick paint. Just zone right into these little details. I'm just going to do these white lines. So if I'm quiet, we're just focusing on going over these lines. So zone into your own painting here, okay? You've got both the horizontal and these vertical lines to do. And I will say, if you're having a hard time with the thin lines, add water to your paint and pull your brush down to a thin fin. When I get down to the smallest parts of the tail, I really just think about the light as opposed to all the little lines because it's so small down here. So the light's hitting the top. Here, and then it gets a little shadowy under here, and then the light really hits here again. Light coming down from the top. So under here, shadow. Here is light. Here is in shadow. Come into some of this runny white and let's come into the face and do some little highlights in there. I always look at the tip of my brush before I do a little detail like this. So I mix the water into the paint and then I pull it down. You can wipe it on your palette too if you don't like getting your hands in there. So let's highlight the top of the little snout here. I'm using that white that has a little glazing liquid in it. And let's come around the eye, some little taps. I'm going to pull a little light blue into the bottom of the snout. Back into the white. Get a little paint in there and then you can use your finger, tap around. We're going to have little ridges coming off the face here. And then that same kind of little spiky shape coming down the bottom of the face. Put a little light in the eye. If you want to brighten any of these colors, you're just going to follow the patterns of light and shadow. And here's what I mean. So if I want to highlight some of these blue edges, I'm going to come into some light blue, but we need to let it get shadowy towards the top just because that's where the light source is. So I might even take a big brush like this 6 round, get a little water glazing liquid in the paint, and just gently drag it up from the bottom. Okay. And maybe here too, light's coming from the top. So it's going to be a little lighter at the bottom of these segments. We can do the same with our orange paint. So we can take a lighter orange and highlight the bottom of some of these segments. Take your time. I can still see some of my splatter bubbles. Here it is up close. But I want a little more, so I'm going to tap a little splatter in here. as one of my final tweaks. Some seahorses have little kind of black dot textures in them. I have a few of them in this seahorse, like just a couple, like little black dots through the face. You don't have to do that, but if you wanted to. Just have a few. The tip of a small brush. When you feel like you're finished, I want you to go ahead, sit back and relax because you just finished painting your seahorse for today. Spend as much time as you like playing with and tweaking this seahorse. I love going in for really bright highlights sometimes on those ridges. So you can really customize this to get it looking the way you like. I know someone said that the seahorse reminds them a bit of a dragon, and they absolutely do. They are just magical creatures of this world, and I'm so happy you joined me today to paint one. I think this would be a super lovely painting to hang up, like in a bathroom, you know, whenever we're playing with water. Part of us belongs to the water too, doesn't it? Baths are relaxing. Swimming is amazing. So I think we have an affinity with sea creatures of this world. I'm going to hang out in case you have any last minute questions for me here. All right, Deb says, what's next? I'm going to hang out and I am going to show you what's coming up. Marla asks, what do you use to seal it? I typically don't put varnish on my paintings unless I want to change the sheen of a painting to make it more matte or to make it more shiny or to use a satin finish. If I varnish a painting, it's because it's going to be in a high traffic area. And honestly, if you're putting it in a bathroom, you might want to varnish it, you know, just because of the humidity in the bathroom. But with that being said, like if I take this napkin, I know some people say they varnish to clean it, but I can take this napkin and like scrub as hard as I can, and I'm not moving the paint around. So I've really scrubbed paintings hard. I've got paintings that are over 30 years old that have never been varnished and they're just fine. So typically I try to save on materials and I don't find a need to varnish, especially since I use artist quality paints that are already archival quality. That being said, you might want to varnish, again, high traffic area, maybe a little bit more light fastness, which is another thing varnish does. And if you varnish, there's tons of amazing acrylic varnishes. There's one of my favorites is by Golden. I love another one by Liquitex. And you just go into the art store and get any acrylic varnish. Again, the ones by Golden, Liquitex, or Winsor Newton are going to be the best quality ones that you can get. Okay. Anne says, can you use glazing liquid as a varnish? Yes, you absolutely can. You can use plain matte medium as a varnish as well. Any of the clear mediums in acrylic you can use as a top coat. Sometimes the matte top coats have a slight bit of a whiteness to them. So if you put it on really thick, it can make your painting look a little bit like frosted. So if you really want to have the brightest varnish, go for the satin or the gloss. And Shirley said the seahorse's mouth is a snout. They eat plankton and small fish. Okay, thank you guys for the wonderful seahorse fun facts. And with that, you are all done for today. So I hoped painting this felt good to you, and I'd love it if you could share our channel with any of your friends that are interested in acrylic painting and want to get themselves in the groove in the comfort of their own home. You can join our private Facebook sharing group and show off your paintings. If you're not already a member, I'll post a link below. Now, I have a large library of over 500 acrylic painting tutorials over on my website at jessierobertson.com. So whether you love painting florals, animals, landscapes, still life, impasto palette knife style, or you just want to cuddle up with a super cute seasonal theme, I have a little something for every occasion, and each of my tutorials is packed with acrylic painting techniques, tips, and tricks. I like to go nice and slow, so even when we're doing detailed paintings like the seahorse today and more advanced techniques like layering and blending in small segments, I like to break them down into what brush we use in the medium so that they're all beginner friendly, even the more detailed ones. If you are taking a deep dive into acrylic painting, you might enjoy our Kick Academy, and that is my subscription. It gives you unlimited access to all 500 paintings, and 8 new classes are added each month. And I keep my subscription cost to just $15 a month for that unlimited access. Now, I am live right here every Saturday and every Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So let's take a quick peek at what's coming up. Our next class is tomorrow, and it's going to be something completely different. It is a palette knife painting class, and I have the painting here. I'll show you some extreme close-ups. So this is a painting that is full of super rich, luscious texture. You can see even the clouds are raised. So this is all done with a knife. Palette knife paintings are so much fun to do. And I do one impasto style painting every month. Ever since we finished our impasto palette knife painting challenge, which is 6 paintings all done with a palette knife. You guys have said you absolutely love this. So we're going to keep going with one textured painting every month. And isn't that juicy and fun? It's a very textural, kind of tactile way of painting that I find really helped loosen me up. After that, for August, I am filming a special project just for you. So I have brought 9 paintings out of the vault, and we're going to run them again here while I film that project. So let's take a peek. We'll be painting Sunflower Sunset, Black and White Bear, Camper Life, Galactic Orcas, Sunset Sailing, A Little Camping Gnome, Twilight Loon, Red Covered Bridge in Summer, and Fireweed. When we get into September, I've got a large lineup of new acrylic paintings for you, starting with these wild mushrooms in a black botanical style. These are all real mushrooms. They're going to be super fun to paint, especially if there are any foragers out there. After that, we are going to paint this scene at the end of summer in September when we start thinking about transitioning into autumn. things might start to feel a bit more cozy and everything's still green. But when we see that first blush of gold in the grass and the trees, it's a magical moment. We've started a 4-season series of cowboy boots. We just painted cowboy boots in summer. Next up, we're going to paint cowboy boots in autumn, and we're going to do the same cowboy boots for all of the seasons at the beginning of each season to celebrate. And that's what's new and coming up. Stephanie said, I can't wait for tomorrow's palette knife painting. Deb says, I haven't tried palette knife painting yet, but I have to do this one since we are sailors here. Oh, that's awesome. All right, I don't see any more questions coming up, so that is it for me today, you guys. So don't forget to hit that like button and share this video if you enjoyed today's tutorial. That's it for me. Take care. Bye. And until next time, I hope you keep it colorful.